22 часа 28 минут. Масса.
We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon.
One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Dragon deploy verified.
Welcome to Spacevidcast episode 501 for Sunday, March 11th, 2012. We are your hosts, Benjamin and Carrie Ann Higginbotham. Welcome to Season 5. That's right. All new logo, all new website, all new music, all new pretty much everything. We wanted to make the show even more awesome than it had already been before. Before we talk about all the different changes and everything that happened in the last few weeks, I think we should start with some space news and today's main topic. So for those who missed it, which in the space community, not a whole lot, Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson testified before the Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee. And it was about a just under a 30-minute testimony with all the Q&A and whatnot. We've condensed that down to about 3 minutes. So here's about 3 minutes of this. I do recommend you go back and watch the full 30 minutes. But here, check this out.
I want to start off with a quote from a famous aviator, French aviator, Antoine Saint-Exupéry. This quote may be known to some of you, but I think it bears repeating often. If you want to build a ship, don't drum up people to collect wood, and don't assign them tasks and work, but rather teach them to long for the endless immensity of the sea. So that's a point of view that will matter for what follows here. Right now, NASA's Mars science exploration budget is being decimated. We're not going back to the moon. Plans for astronauts to visit Mars or anywhere beyond low Earth orbit are delayed until the 2030s. On funding not yet allocated, overseen by a Congress and a president to be named later. Now, I happen to know, and we all have had this experience, exploration of the unknown doesn't always make a priority for people. I can tell you, however, that audacious visions have the power to alter mind states, to change assumptions about what is possible. And when a nation allows itself to dream big, these dreams prevail in the citizens' ambitions. They energize the electorate. During the Apollo era, you didn't need government programs trying to convince people that doing science and engineering was good for the country. It was self-evident. And even those not formally trained in technical fields embraced what those fields meant to the collective national future. Well, yes, war can get you to go to the moon, even get you to go to Mars, but there's another driver that exists, another driver of great ambitions, and it's almost as potent as the need to protect your security, and that's the promise of wealth. Nobody wants to die, of course, but nobody wants to die poor. Fully funded missions to Mars and anywhere beyond low Earth orbit, commanded by astronauts who today would be in middle school, would reboot America's capacity to innovate as no other force in society can. Yet if all you do is coast, eventually you slow down while others catch up and pass you by. We've got symptoms in society today. We're going broke, we're mired in debt, we don't have as many scientists as we want or need, and jobs are going overseas. I assert that these are not isolated problems, that they're the collective consequence of the absence of ambition that consumes you when you stop having dreams. Consider, however, that the half a penny budget that NASA receives, if you double it, twice that, as unthinkable that is to so many, I assert that we can transform the country from a sullen, dispirited nation, weary of economic struggle, to one where it has reclaimed its 20th century birthright to dream of tomorrow. And I ask you, how much would you pay to launch our economy? And from my scientific heart, I ask, how much would you pay for the universe?
So that was a very small version of that speech. Ryan Space in the chat room asked, I saw an 8-minute version on YouTube. Is that the whole thing?
Right.
That is the full official testimony that he gave that was scripted, is that 8-minute part. And then they kind of went into this Q&A session. What you really want to do, and we'll put this in the wiki for this particular episode, you really want to watch the full 25-minute version where they go back and forth with the Q&A, because he's on fire, dude. But this brings up the main topic for this week's show. And the question I pose to everyone here is, should NASA be a catalyst for space? In other words, right now, they're building SLS. They're working on building vehicles. Should they be focusing their time and effort on building the vehicles? Or should they be focusing their time and effort on finding ways to fund other companies to do their own thing?
Like the FAA of space?
Well, the FAA doesn't fund anyone. They regulate everything.
Right,
So
right.
I don't think the FAA of space, what I'm saying is, could they instead look at innovative companies out there and say, you know what you're doing could get us on the moon in 5 years. We're going to give you $100 million. Ready to go. And what you're doing is a leap forward in propulsion. We're going to give you $1 billion or whatever it might be.
Okay.
And rather than building the vehicles themselves, they just give the money to other people to build. And they kind of do that today, but they still have these congressionally mandated vehicles like SLS.
Right.
Maybe it's not it's not best for them to spend their time on that.
Right.
Maybe instead
Right.
they should be exploring Mars with robots. Curiosity is kind of awesome. Maybe they should be sending planetary vehicles out there, but then also seeding money into the private industry. Maybe that's a bad idea. Maybe it's just so expensive that governments have to do it.
Well, I mean, so are you saying, like, just in terms of human spaceflight, that NASA doesn't do human spaceflight anymore, but they continue to do, like, robotic spaceflight and other robotic missions?
I don't know.
But that human spaceflight is then like, all right, well, look, we've got however many dollars to sort of dole out to people. You're doing something cool, here's some money for you. You're doing something cool, here's some money for you. I mean, is that kind of what?
I guess it seems a little bit weird to split it into the two, right? So if you're going
Well, yeah,
to
but
be
at the
dishing
same
out money,
time-
maybe they should dish out money for companies to do. Part of it comes from what's the economic benefit for a company to build Curiosity, for example, MSL, Mars Science Laboratory. Why would a company want to build that? What's their ROI? What's their return on investment? Well, science knowledge is certainly return on investment. We're going to learn amazing things from Mars using that vehicle.
Right.
But from a business perspective, that's very difficult to justify to a company. So that's where I do see NASA, maybe building a vehicle. And maybe the same can be said for human spaceflight. But
Right.
there's something different about humans, right? So the government, traditionally speaking, government doesn't build airplanes for consumers.
Right.
Boeing, Airbus, for whatever reason, I can't think of anyone else now. But
Everyone else who does that.
right, they build the airplanes.
Right.
The government regulates what they can do to make sure they're safe, but the government doesn't build the airplanes.
Right.
Trains,
Okay.
cars.
Right.
In fact, it's really
right.
only space. NASA builds rockets. That's really the only example of the government building the vehicle.
Right.
Throughout history, you look at
Well, for a while, like, nobody else could, right? Like, who had the money to do that? Until Elon, like, made PayPal and all of the other stuff, and then decided, I'm going to make my own rocket. right? Like, I mean, who else is doing that, really?
Not a whole lot of people, but there's no incentive to do it because we've got these big, huge.
Because
fat
NASA's already doing it?
Kind of, yeah. As ArcDude says, it's mostly political now, and I'll extrapolate your comment and say it's a jobs program now.
Yeah.
Right? We had Apollo, and then the Nixon administration nixed Apollo, and then they kind of said, what's the cheapest thing we can do to keep jobs? And that was the space shuttle. It wasn't the space station at the time. It was just the space shuttle.
Right.
And that's how we ended up with what we've got. But, I guess it kind of sneaks into our next story, which is they're hiring in Mohave, right?
Yeah,
so there's an
like
article.
gangbusters. Everyone come to California.
Kind
when
of.
Space Up LA came out with their T-shirts, the slogan on the back, or maybe it was even the front, was the new Space Coast, because the East Coast has traditionally been considered the Space Coast. Like even if you go down into Florida, if you guys have ever been on that side, there's like the Space Coast Bank, and they say the Space Coast over the radio. Like, it's just a known fact that they are the Space Coast. And California is up and coming like nobody's business. And yeah, Mohave can hardly get their hands on enough people. It's ridiculous.
Interesting points in the chat room. Nate Kate, I'm sorry, Nate Kate. I'm combining usernames.
Radio
Natronic says, even
Kate?
SpaceX is standing on the shoulders of NASA technology. I think everyone is.
Yeah, everyone is.
I mean, the rocket technology fundamentally has not changed since the 60s.
Right.
Not that much, right? So we're all standing on the shoulders of what NASA learned to go to the moon.
Right.
And a lot of us are relearning those lessons. So absolutely there was value in that. But is there still value in that today? That's my question. I don't really know the answer to that.
Right.
Should NASA continue to do what it's doing? I would argue right now it's a jobs program that actually serves no one. When you try to make a jobs program, there's no fundamental point to it. Taxpayers say, why are we giving you money? And eventually that money starts to slowly decline.
Right.
That's exactly what's been happening, right? The funding to NASA has slowly been dripping off. People are saying, why are we doing this? I don't understand. They look at the International Space Station and say, we spend $100 billion for what?
Right.
And people, just general people, are like, I don't understand why we're giving NASA all of this money. Because there's no inspiration there. And I think that does go back to Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson's NDT? I forgot what that acronym was. Point.
Dr. Tyson?
Dr. Tyson's point that you need to be inspired in order to grow and build your economy. Otherwise, you're just going to decline. So anyhow, leave your comments on YouTube. This last show, and we'll talk about it in the back half of the show, this last show we had over 120 comments. I looked it up before the show.
Yeah.
And I
don't think I've gone through all of them yet.
No,
it's
and
like
the best part
novel.
is they were mostly civilized. And that's the key here.
Yes.
Is we're not looking for heated debate. We're not looking for people to call other people names. That serves no one.
Right.
But a general education, everyone can learn from everyone else, and there are two sides to every coin.
Yeah.
So a civilized debate as to what the best place for NASA is, and does government have a place in human exploration, or should it be much like the automobile industry or the airplane industry, where they simply patrol it, regulate it,
right,
and then the private companies take it over completely, or is it just simply way too expensive? Traditionally, governments have done it, but does that mean that's the best way to do it? I pose that question to you. Anyhow, that's our main topic for today. And speaking of, we touched on this lightly, Mohave is hiring.
Yes.
So the problem here is there are like 13,000 jobs or something that have been lost by the space shuttle industry, and Mohave is hiring like 20 people. I mean, it's not even remotely close to the same number of people that have been laid off.
No, for sure. It's X-Core Scale Composites, the spaceship company, which is building the White Knight 2s and Spaceship 2s for Virgin Galactic. They're all... Yeah, it's like, Maston has got 5 positions open. Just need to check their websites for the most part. Firestar Technologies. Stratolaunch doesn't seem to have anything at the moment.
But they haven't really started yet.
Right.
They're still building buildings.
Right. Give it a year or two. Anyway, but yeah, so it's impressive how many different companies, that are out there in the middle of the desert. But they're all hiring. It's pretty awesome.
Jumping backwards a little bit, because Uncle BS brought up a good point. Dr. NDT, that's his acronym, Neil deGrasse Tyson, Stewart, and he reminded people that NASA's budget is only half of 1 penny.
Right.
For every
on the
half
dollar.
of a penny, as compared to military spending or services like welfare, stuff like that. If you combine all of that, what is it? Military and what is the other one?
I forget.
Social Security. military and Social Security make up 50 cents of every dollar.
Yes.
As opposed to NASA's 1/2 of 1 penny. So there's a huge discrepancy there. And his point is bring it up to 1 penny. Double it. 1 penny. So, all right. Other cool stuff that happened when we were off the air, Atlas V launched with the Mobile User Objective System. It's the first satellite and basically a DoD telecommunications satellite. And we wouldn't be a space podcast if we didn't show you the launch. So
this is true.
This is an Atlas V from the Cape. Here you go.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We have ignition, and we have liftoff. Liftoff of the United Launch Alliance Atlas V rocket carrying the first Mobile User Objective System mission for the United States Navy. MUOS will significantly enhance communications for U.S. forces on the move. You're now hearing the voice of Marty Malinowski providing launch vehicle ascent data. Let's listen in for mission progress.
Mach 1. Max Q. Vehicle has begun throttling up right on schedule. Engine response looks good. SRB chamber pressures have plateaued, holding stable. Booster PU is now in closed loop control. Engine response looks good. And the booster has begun its next throttle segment. Engine response looks good. Next event will be the SRB burnout. Chamber pressures continue to look good. And we're having SRB burnout. Signatures look good. And we've begun throttling back up right on time. And we have jettisoned solids 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Looks like clean separation. And we've begun Q alpha limited steering. And begun a small roll for thermal constraints.
And you can watch the whole thing on YouTube. It's funny because with the way the camera angles work and the way it arcs with it, it almost looks at the end like it was going back down.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah. I was
Like
really
it was
weirded out when I was
flying down.
watching the webcast.
And it's also kind of weird with how many solids they've got on that thing that just break off in this little itty bitty core and this ginormous fairing up top. It's like, just this huge thing sitting on the top of the rocket.
It was kind of crazy.
So that launched, what was that, February 24th, 2012. And that was an interesting one because weather kept delaying it. So they would go out, they'd do their thing, they'd scrub, they'd go
it's
out,
on,
do
it's
their
off.
thing.
It's on, it's off.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh,
So
well.
lots of that. And that was MUOS #1. It's going to be a constellation of satellites. That was the first one. MUOS. That went up and did its thing. So, all right. I lost track.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So SpaceX has completed what some have called a mock launch, which is basically it's a wet dress.
I was just going to say, that's kind of what a wet dress is, isn't it?
That's exactly what it is. You want to talk about this for a second?
Yeah, it's wet dress, for those of you who are unfamiliar, is where you do actually fuel up the vehicle. You move it out from the assembly building or from the protective building. In SpaceX's case, you lift it up, kind of crane it up. And so it's standing on the pad. It's living, breathing. You can see the locks sort of burn off and everything.
Liquid oxygen.
Yes, liquid oxygen burn off. I apologize. And it looks like the whole thing is going to go. And they go through the entire checklist. They go through the countdown as if they're going to make this puppy go. And then it's like minus 5 seconds and counting, T-minus 5 seconds or 4 seconds and counting or something like that. Somebody hits the great big red abort button so that they don't actually launch it. Is pretty much what it comes down to. But up until that point, it is as real as it gets. If anyone was in theater, it's like an actual dress rehearsal. So it's pretty important. And it's really cool that they pretty much went through everything with very little issues, is my understanding. And it was beautiful day. It was fun. It was fun to watch. It was fun, really interesting to kind of see that sort of go on.
Yeah, and for full disclosure, the reason you took this is I work for SpaceX.
Yeah.
So SpaceX doesn't sponsor the show. They're not part of the show. We don't represent any of the opinions or anything at SpaceX, and we don't have any inside information on SpaceX either.
But we liked them way before we worked for them.
We liked them
Or he
way
worked
before
for
I
them.
worked for them. So that's why she took that story, because I just, the only information she has is what's available out in the general public, and it's way easier for you to take those particular types
and
of
the
stories.
the pictures are amazing. It's like the most gorgeous day ever. Anyhow, if you get a chance to see those, please feel free to do that. So that's really cool. They seemingly hit all the marks that they wanted to hit, and so they're as far as I know, and because he doesn't tell me anything, as far as I know, they're basically ready to go when they can go. So that's really cool.
Yeah, and I believe we're currently targeting an end of April launch date. I think that was on Twitter, Elon's Twitter feed.
Yeah, like April 29th or 30th. It's
something like that.
It's like the last day in April while still being April kind of thing.
So ESA wants to land on the moon in 2018, and they're doing this kind of interestingly.
More power to them, man. Let go.
So they're going to touch down on the moon's south pole, and they want to do it around 2018. But they're going to use the automated transfer vehicle's engines as the landing engines for that.
Can you explain to me how that works? Because I don't totally understand that.
Okay, where are you stuck?
I don't know. Just start at the beginning for the most part.
Well,
like, how do you dumb this down for a 7-year-old?
Well, they're going to take the engines off of one vehicle,
right,
and move them to another one.
But it's just going to work? Because weren't they specifically made for the other vehicle?
Right. That's the problem.
Okay,
no, they're not necessarily. They're not necessarily going to work.
That really is the question, right?
Yeah. So they're testing it right now to see if that's actually going to be a viable option. And thus far, the tests seem to be going pretty good.
Right.
So that's their plan. And actually, I think it's a pretty interesting idea. It's why build something brand new when we can just reuse the technology we already have? It's going to be better, cheaper, faster type of thing.
Okay, so, is that, so they don't know if it's going to work?
Well, that's what they're testing right now. So they tested a descent and touchdown. They simulated it with their thrusters. They fired a series of bursts, and it went off well.
Okay.
So they believe that using this on their lunar lander, it will actually work. And that's the cool thing about it.
That would be really cool if that works.
Yeah, absolutely. So these are the thrusters, not the main, but the thrusters of ATVs, the automated transfer vehicle that they send. They currently send the automated transfer vehicle to the International Space Station. It resupplies the space station every so often with stuff, and it's a pretty cool vehicle. I think the first
and that's
going to
be powerful enough to get up to the moon? I mean,
Well,
that's kind
no,
of what people have been saying about the space or the space shuttle, right? Everyone kind of goes, well, the space shuttle can get all the way to the International Space Station. Why can't it just keep going further to the moon?
So this is the descent stage.
Okay.
This is not getting to the moon. These engines don't get us to the moon.Ese engines get us from a lunar orbit down to the moon.
Yeah, I just want to make sure.
Yeah, this isn't going to be all the way. That would be awesome, but not realistic.
All right, I just,
Yeah, so that's what's going on with ESA. So I thought that was kind of cool. And then finally, speaking of different government powers doing different things, there was an article on IO9, and I'm not sure I agree with it. Did you add this one in there?
Yeah, I did.
This is so I'll let you talk about it first, and then I'll give you my opinion.
So I thought it was kind of interesting. Essentially, is saying that could Brazil be the next space superpower? And the article is very sort of pro-Brazil being the next space superpower.
Yes, it is.
So in that light, they make a lot of really good points, right? Like Brazil is like 3 degrees off of the equator, which means you don't have to do a ton of adjusting if you're launching from essentially the equator, which is means that you don't have to use as much fuel, et cetera, et cetera.
And you get to use, so you're using basically the maximum rotation of the Earth to your benefit.
Right.
So you don't have to go against the Earth. You can use that rotation to help loft you into orbit.
Right. And while the complex is relatively old, it was built in 1983. It's still newer than some of the other complexes.
We're built in the 60s?
Right, exactly. And it's the center itself, the launch center, is sequestered from surrounding cities and only accessible by air or boat. which I think is really interesting. So it's sort of akin to Cape Canaveral to a certain extent. I mean, you can still drive to Cape Canaveral, but I mean, it's kind of got that. Cape has like all that wildlife refuge around it.
In it.
Right?
Right?
Yeah.
You're driving down there, you're like, gator.
There's a guy who sits on
Animal,
the pad who's got an air horn to scare
space
away
bat.
the birds, okay? I mean, that's where we are. So in that sort of same vein, it's kind of in an unpopulated area,
Right.
I guess, is sort of where
Most spaceports are. When things explode, they don't want people nearby.
Well, I mean, except for Russia.
No.
Anyway, so I don't know. It brought up a lot of really good points that were interesting, and they seem to be relatively ready for it for the most part, other than they haven't done a whole lot.
That's my argument against it. Just because you have a rocket doesn't make you a giant space program.
I know.
So lofting satellites into space, which is what Brazil's doing, great. Private companies are doing that now. So that's not a huge spacefaring power. If they want to be a huge spacefaring power, putting people on Moon, putting people into Mars, that's what's going to loft you up to the top.
Right.
The only country I see right now truly making really great strides towards that is China. India maybe, but really China.
Really China, yeah.
So Brazil, they're just not on my radar at all. I mean, maybe they've got something like that they're got hidden in the back that they're going to launch all of a sudden and do a space-based docking, and then I'm going to go, whoa, okay, that's a different game now. But until they start putting humans on board, it's just satellites. And I don't want to say just robots, because robots are important too.
Right.
But a lot of people can do robots.
Yeah.
Robots are a lot easier than humans.
Which is funny because we've already made humans.
We've already made humans?
It's a joke.
Oh. So,
you don't have to make humans. We're already here. You just have to train them.
Okay. Bad
Sorry.
joke.
I'm sorry.
All right. On that terrible note, let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about some of the stuff we talked about not last week, the week before last, in episode 424, I think it was, and some of your comments from that show. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Please welcome Richard Garriott.
I'm a computer game developer.
We think of him as the godfather of virtual world.
Your father had the right stuff, but in my opinion, you have even righter stuff. $30 million.
I will launch and become the first second-generation American astronaut. This entire year, I've been in Star City, just outside of Moscow, training.
This is the goal that I have really been working towards for 20 to 30 years.
The view is going to be fantastic, and you'll remember it for the rest of your life.
Microphones. It's awkward when it's way over there.
Yay, microphones. That's always a big help, isn't it?
All right, so we talked last week about Newt Gingrich had made when he was down in Florida, he made a presidential speech saying, we're going to put humans on the moon in 2020, we're going to have a colony there. And we said, really? I mean...
Well, and I said, well, that's because he was on the Space Coast, and that's why he said those things.
Right. So... Maybe, but but Dave Maston, and we will bring him back on the show. We're gonna.
He's in the ocean. It wasn't my fault this time.
Well, so if you haven't noticed, we're now in our living room, right? And so we moved 20 feet.
20 feet or so.
20 feet
yeah.
this way.
They don't know that.
No, but now we got some lights in here, and we've actually got a space for guests sitting right directly to our left, so we can actually start bringing guests on the show. And since we're in LA. There are a lot more people available for us to interview in person.
Because nobody's in Minnesota.
Nobody's in Minnesota.
Nobody.
So we will we'll bring Dave Maston on the show, and we'll talk about Newt Gingrich and his plans. We did talk about that in episode 423, which was unfortunately lost to the internet for all time.
Right. Dave did an amazing space obsession at Space of San Diego this year. Pretty much all about that. It was very, very interesting. And then when we had our show at Space of San Diego, he came on or was sitting right there. And so we picked on him all about that. And so he did promise that he would be on. But this weekend, he happened to be in the ocean. So
but we'll bring him on. So, but in the meantime, Newt Gingrich, whether it was just something for him to say on the road or whether it's something he can actually execute on, that's yet to be seen. But we asked you, what did you think? Colonies on the moon by 2020, is that possible? Is it something we should do?
Right.
Or where should we be spending our time? So here are a few comments from our YouTube channel. This is from I'm Not a Parakeet.
Good to know.
Great, that's fantastic. I'm
not either.
The goal I'd like to see done, use the Mars Society's SpaceX Transorbital Railroad plan to send 15 launches per year to Mars, build a self-sustaining colony, mine Phobos and Deimos next. So basically, the non-parakeet would like to see us develop a system to go back and forth to Mars and to some moons and run from there. And I don't know if we could do that in 20 years. Yeah. See, the moon is different than Mars.
Right.
And I kind of get conflicting information. Some say, well, once you can go to the moon, you can easily go to Mars. But you can kind of launch to the moon a lot more often than you can launch to Mars, right? There's only a window every 24 months.
Right.
There's a lot more that we don't know about Mars. Braking on Mars is difficult, too. There's no... When you go to Mars, there is no safe haven. When you... Using Apollo 13 as an example, if something goes wrong, you can still recover.
Right.
On a Martian mission, if you're all the way out there,
you're SOL, dude.
You're not making it back, right? I mean, they barely made it back for Apollo 13. So it's a little bit different. Can we do that by year 2020? Probably not. I wish we could. I really do wish we could.
That would be awesome.
But I just don't see the political will or the money being thrown at that particular program to make that happen. But
things could change, right? I mean, theoretically getting a new president soon. And, maybe that president will be like, you know what, awesome, and making it rain, who knows?
Yeah, except it doesn't matter, right? So the timelines for space are so long that a president could say, yeah, we're going to build a rocket to go to Mars. That is not going to happen. We barely made it to the moon within a decade.
Right.
We're not going to make it within 8 years to Mars. Unless there's some radical new technology or someone's already been working on it or we really throw some might behind it. I just don't see that happening. Back in the Apollo era, you could waste anything but time.
Right.
So they throw money at it, they do it, but they could not waste time.
Right.
Now you can waste anything but money, which means you can spend more time on things as long as you're not spending a lot of money on it. That means that your timelines get stretched out, so that's not going to happen within one presidency.
Right.
Which means the next president comes along and goes, that program, that was from that other wasteful president. I don't want anything to do with that.
Right.
Squash.
Right.
Kill, destroy, crush. So
just like that.
Crush.
Okay.
Which brings up another interesting point from, how would you pronounce that?
Vassallo?
Vassallo?
Sure.
What's the reason to want it? In other words, what's the reason to want going to the moon? We already have an internationally cooperative space station, exploration devices in orbit and on Mars. The lack of reason doesn't justify the cost. That's why people are mocking Newt. It's because there's no need for it. And they are. They're hardcore mocking him.
Oh, yeah.
Is there a need to go to the moon and build a colony by 2020? What do you think?
I vacillate, right? Like, part of me wants to say yes, because, wherever you are on the planet, as long as it's a relatively clear night, you can look up and go, that's the moon. And if you know that people are on the moon, like, how inspiring is that? How often do we see Mars in the sky? Not nearly as often as I see the moon, I can tell you that much.
It's a teeny tiny dot.
Right? I mean, it's different, right? It's completely different. And there's an interesting connection, you know, we moved to California, and my family and his family is still in Minnesota. I can't see Minnesota from California, but if they were on the moon, or if we were on the moon and they were still in Minnesota, they could still have this interesting connection because they can look up in the sky and go, there they are. I can see where they are. That's where they are.
So the username just scrolled off the screen, so I apologize, I missed your username, but it said the Mars is a much more inspiring target.
Oh, Dognader?
Yeah, and there were a few other comments. Help me out here.
Here.
Much tougher but far more rewarding target. And Pete says, there's a reason to go to the moon so I can live there. And I would love to do that too. Actually, we were talking, Emery's,
Totally.
Vax Headroom in the chat room was in Anaheim recently, and so we got together. We went to Disney, kind of.
Sort
downtown
of.
Disney, as you know. So grabbed some dinner at Disney, and we talked about, what did we talk about?
Having our show on
Having
the
our
moon.
show on the moon.
Wow.
That was exactly it. Wow. But having our show on the moon and having like windows behind us that just have the Earth. And, you know, Emery's talking about, well, and it was a really super bright moon that night.
Yeah,
full moon.
really bright.
Really bright.
Holy moly.
And he said, well, imagine see how bright that is. Imagine what the Earth would be like. Is Emery in the room right now? Yeah. Vax, how bright did you say the Earth would be? Like 33 times brighter than what the moon was in the sky? Imagine that as a background. Imagine how inspiring that would be to all of humanity to see people broadcasting live from the moon in a similar situation where we're interacting 32 times, thank you, Vax, interacting with you in real time. Doesn't have to be us. Pick anyone.
Yeah, anyone, I don't care.
But we'll do it.
We'll do it. I'll volunteer.
We'll do it.
But it doesn't have to be us. Just saying.
And what's funny is people are saying Moon Vidcast in the chat room. We own that.com already. We've already planned that. And by the way, in case you're thinking about Mars, we own that too.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Somebody was saying that the moon is a stepping stone to, it's like a proving ground that prove that we can get to Mars or do Mars and get industries in space so that government isn't the only one funding, isn't the only funding or source reason, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah.
Which actually the moon is a good stepping stone. There are Marsies, I don't know what to call them, but people who are like, forget the moon, let's go straight to Mars. Marsists. People who just want to skip the moon and go to Mars. Personally, I think it's a little short-sighted. You can use the moon as a stepping stone to Mars.
Right.
The gravity off the moon is far easier than the gravity off of Earth. So go from Earth to moon, fuel everything up, and then use moon as a launching point to Mars.
As a literal launching point.
Literal launching point. Literally launch from the moon. Literally? It's literally?
That's true. Ryan Space makes a good point. They're not necessarily Marsites, but they're Zubernites.
Zubernites, yes. Grogian? I gotta work on these usernames. Time to break out the woodwork and use other means for space travel. Traditional solid liquid chemical rockets are inefficient and old tech. In 50 years, there isn't much else or change. Vesmir maybe, which is well, we'll talk about that in a minute. But it does show how to fix the radiation problem, but still uses rockets. Come on. Basically,
I mean, come on.
Basically, talking about the idea that we're still using chemical propulsion that hasn't changed that much since the 50s and 60s.
Right.
Really at all, right? We're using LOX and RP1 and LOX, liquid oxygen and rocket propellant 1,
right.
or liquid oxygen, liquid hydrogen to propel ourselves into space. And then in the 80s, we started using a lot more solid fuels.
Interesting.
That's it.
Interesting.
Right, so why don't we work on new propulsion technology? Because right now, 90% of your mass, or whatever it comes out to, is fuel. If there was some way we could reduce that, that would be better. Now, Elon Musk has said, but while that may be a good chunk of your mass, most of the cost of the vehicle goes into the vehicle itself, not the fuel.
Right.
So if you can make the vehicle reusable, all of it reusable, and just fuel it back up, that radically reduces the cost of spaceflight.
Yeah.
So there are two different approaches to that, right? Generate completely new propulsion technology, or make the rocket completely reusable, or both.
Speaking of new propulsion technology, Ghost 2501 is asking about mag launch or Maglev launch systems.
Okay, so mag launch is, I hesitate to use the word crazy. Well, it's doable.
It's different.
It's different. You build a really long rail, and it's a magnetic rail where you build up speed.
A rail launch. Is that what they...
Kind of like a rail gun.
Right.
And I forgot, distances are usually measured in like 10 or 20 miles of this rail that you need to have going up. And you speed up along this rail, and then you get enough momentum that you don't actually have to fire your rockets until you're maybe 100,000 feet in the air.
Right, because you go up, you've built up so much sort of upwards momentum from the magnets that you don't have to shoot your rockets until you start kind of coming down a little bit.
Well, you would keep your
going.
momentum. You wouldn't even have to keep. You would just keep the momentum. But the idea being that you've already got enough momentum to escape a good chunk of Earth's gravity.
Right.
So now you don't need as much fuel. But there's a trade-off to that, which is how are you going to build a vehicle as big as what we've got today? These vehicles aren't small, so you can have as much payload. Yeah, you've gained some momentum, but now you have to be able to launch these ginormous vehicles. And you got to worry about inertia. I don't know. Technically possible, more realistic than a space elevator, slightly out there. But you know, the difference between crazy and brilliant is whether whether you can do it or not.
But so that wouldn't be applicable for human space launch.
Could be. As long as you can keep the inertia down so that you don't flatten the person, you could be a...
It wouldn't shake them to death, I suppose, because you don't have the...
It could be very, very smooth.
Interesting.
It wouldn't be like a solid...
Right.
It would be a nice, smooth flight until the rockets kick on.
Okay.
Yep.
Interesting.
So ArcDude is saying maglev systems on the moon, not Earth. Same exact issues apply to either, right?
Yeah.
Issue on the moon, issue on Earth, whatever. You still got to build these really long rails. Obviously, the moon has less gravity, so you need less rail to overcome said gravity. But at that point, why? I mean, I don't see the benefit. But again,
right.
Crazy, brilliant. I don't know which.
Space Explorer says no railgun could be built that would be survivable by humans. Okay, interesting. And then G Cubed 72 says, welcome aboard the Walt Disney World Express monorail.
Boosh! So you wouldn't really be a railgun Space Explorer. That's true. The railgun, the inertia would just flatten you. And that was my point earlier. You can't. You have to build it in such a way you wouldn't be flattened. So we need inertia dampeners. Or you don't use. You make the track long enough where you go from 0 to whatever you end up with off the track over an amount of time that basically only forces 3 Gs. But now you got this freakishly long track. And again, I ask,
I can go from San Diego to Portland in 0.17 seconds. Interesting. All right. That's fair.
So Vax is correcting me, saying mag launch on the moon is way easier, lower escape velocity, no atmosphere to deal with, but that applies to the rockets too, right? So same exact stuff applies. Not as much gravity, lower escape velocity, so why not just use a traditional chemical rocket to get, hand me that.
Yeah.
Whoops.
Right, traditional rocket, keep talking.
No, that was the end of that.
Okay.
Was that the last point? Oh, here we go.
No,
We got one more.
I can read it.
Great.
F Cycles says, I'd like to see NASA and other space agencies put on a website information about how we can colonize the moon first, with the challenges, problems, budget, in order to help students of today to study and solve these issues for tomorrow.
For the record, I copy your comments 1-to-1.
Right.
so I do not.
And that was my first time reading that.
Those are your own
so
words.
That
yes.
was interesting.
The fundamental point there was
yes.
Rather than just saying this is what we're going to do, put the information out there and say these are the challenges. These are how we think we're going to get around them.
So open source to a certain extent.
To a certain extent, yes. Open it up a little bit.
Isn't Open NASA kind of doing that?
Kind of, yes. And that was actually the point I wanted to bring up was this is an interesting thing where NASA is better than anyone else. Private space companies have zero requirement to make their private information public. NASA has to, basically, not their private, not their classified information, but a lot of what they do, they're required to talk about.
Right.
And a good chunk of what they do is actually on nasa.gov right now.
Mm-hmm.
And as Carrie Ann posted in the chat room, opennasa.com. So you can get a lot of this information today. Now, I think the point of that post was, well, what we'd really like to see is something that talks about what are the challenges, different ways we think that we can overcome them, and maybe people could vote and say, look, I'd be willing to put my tax dollars to work at this, which brings up another interesting concept. What if NASA wasn't funded by taxpayers anymore, but instead was funded by donations completely? I don't believe you can donate to NASA. I don't think that's allowed. What if they just stopped funding NASA and said, look, if you want NASA to continue, you can donate money. It's a tax write-off for you. You can donate up to $1 million or whatever it is, right? Some maybe don't even put a limit on it. But let them, you know what I mean?
Right.
Would they still make as much money as they do now? Would they still get, we'll call it, I'm rounding up to 20 billion. Would they make more? Would a lot of people say, yeah, that's an inspiring thing. I want to keep that going, right?
Right.
So no longer make it illegal for donations to NASA, but also no longer make it part of the budget, which means senators or whomever can no longer control what NASA does. The people control it. They vote with their dollars. And NASA says, look, these are the 5 programs we're thinking of doing. One's to Mars, one's SLS, one's something else, and here are the pros and cons of each. You know what? Whichever programs you want to see go, fund them. Give us your money. It's a total tax write-off, 100% tax write-off, but you have to fund them. Would that ever happen? Is it possible for that to happen? And if it did happen, would people actually fund them? I know there would be a few heavy hitters. I know I would pay, but how many, would there be enough people that pay to give NASA enough money to make it go?
Right. Yeah, I don't know.
Maybe it's a terrible idea too, right? I mean, they could go from $20 billion to like $5 million overnight.
Right.
Maybe that's not a bad thing either.
Well,
right? Because now, but oh man, I go back and forth in my head. I'm like, oh, this is great because now I can vote and say, yeah, no, I don't like SLS, but I really like your Curiosity program.
Right.
At the same time, I'm halfway educated on this stuff. Imagine someone who has no idea, just throwing votes and money at programs that are just
I don't know how I feel
wacky.
about that.
Yeah. Anyhow.
Yeah.
So, all right, that's most of our show. I feel a couple house cleaning notes. Welcome to season 5. First off, hope you guys liked it. If you watched live, we had a faux little intro for you. That was fun.
Yeah.
New logo, new theme music. We're going to make a lot of this stuff available for you to download on our brand new website, which just went live right before the show started. So check out spacevidcast.com. It's pretty cool.
There are still some glitches. We understand some of the epic links don't quite work yet. We haven't uploaded absolutely everything yet. I've gotten through about from all of season 4, season 3, and most of season 2. I'm working backwards because I figure that helps. That includes like space ups and new space and all that kind of stuff.
I'm sorry, that was just a really fascinating comment. Saturn, what is that, 15?
Sure.
Maybe Disney should take over NASA. I wonder if that's actually a bad idea. They've got money. They like to inspire people.
Right.
They've got marketing resources.
Right.
What if Disney, I'm just going to throw this out there. What if Disney started a space program? What if they actually made the Moonliner? All right, I'm sorry. So anyhow,
that would
new
be cool.
website.
Anyway.
And back.
Right.
New website. We're working on making sure all the content works. Most of season 4 should work. We'll get it up and running over the next week. Spacevidcast Epic subscribers, you've got some great new content on the way very shortly here. You've got the LA Space Salon, the Q&A session with William Pomerantz. We had Doug Jones from X-Core.
Yep.
His Q&A session was amazing. You've got Lee Valentine.
Yep.
His Q&A session also, oh wow, that was insane. So these are Epic only items, and you need to be a Spacevidcast Epic subscriber, which you can get at spacevidcast.com/epic. Not only do you get that custom, and we had from the Curiosity program.
Oh, right. It was the AIAA talk from February.
And we've got a lot more stuff coming along. So we're covering all the LA space salons, which are amazing. If you're in the LA area, we'd definitely go there in person, right? There's nothing like being there live. But if you can't do that, then certainly the Spacevidcast on-demand version, we make a smaller free version available. But if you're really a space geek and you want to help Spacevidcast out, help us keep broadcasting, sign up for Spacevidcast Epic, and you get that extra premium content that no one else has access to. In addition, everything becomes ad-free, so you don't have the pop-up overlay banners at the bottom. You don't get pre-roll ads, mid-roll ads, or post-roll ads anymore. Those all go away. Then interesting ads that are space related, like the Angry Bird Space, those are still in there, but you can fast forward through those if you want to. In addition, one little thing we fixed is up until now, Epic subscribers, you actually had to wait for it to download before you could, but now we've enabled streaming. We're on the Akamai network now, which means you can actually jump, let's say it's a 2-hour session, you can jump anywhere you want to without having to download the whole thing. So that's kind of a nice thing for you to be able to do. And because it's Akamized, that should work anywhere in the world. Asterisks. Right? Yeah, that's how that works.
Right.
So that's Spacevidcast Epic. Additionally, we're going to mess with the show timing one more time. Sorry, guys. So daylight saving time just kicked in. That meant it was 3 o'clock Pacific time, 2100 hours, coordinated universal time. We're moving the show to Saturdays. And we're doing this because we were playing with the show times, trying to figure out what would work, and we've determined that Saturdays are the best day where we can pretty much guarantee a show. And we really want to be week after week after week so that you guys get your space nerd out. But we're going to move it backwards 1 hour. So right now it's going to be Saturdays at 2000 hours coordinated universal time.
Yes.
Which is 2 o'clock Pacific Daylight Time, 6 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time. So you can figure out that math. We'll post information on Twitter, but the show from now on, Saturdays, mid-afternoon. So we hope you'll join us live. We love having these shows with you. And of course, for those who are watching live and are non-Epic subscribers, you can continue to watch. And we're going to go into Spacevidcast After Dark after this. If you are an Epic subscriber, that's another neat little feature. You get to watch After Dark, which is for Epic subscribers only, on demand at any time. Any final comments before we...
No.
All right. I'd like to thank everyone very much for watching, and we'll see you in a week.